and welcome to the second part of our special Geotech Hour, where we will discuss the launch of the report authored by the Commission on the Geopolitical Impacts of New Technologies and Data. I'm your co-host, Stephanie Wander, Deputy Director and Senior Fellow here at the Geotech Center. The Geotech Commission report is one of the Geotech Center's flagship efforts and focuses on the ways that data and technology will shape society in the upcoming geotech decade ahead. It reflects 14 months of careful consideration and discussion between esteemed commissioners from government, the private sector, and academia. The Geotech Commission report presents a number of inflection points as new technology and data inventions become integrated into society. The report itself addresses 7 key areas: global science and technology leadership, secure data and communication, enhanced trust and confidence in the digital economy, assured supply chains and system resiliency, continuous global health protection and global wellness, assured space operations for public benefit, and the future of work. You can access the report at atlanticcouncil.org/geotech report. 2 of our key partners and champions in this endeavor have been Amazon Web Services and Accenture. In this opening fireside conversation, we're going to hear from them about why they think it's so important to lead this work. So with that, I'd like to welcome Max Peterson, Vice President Worldwide Public Sector at Amazon Web Services, and David Treat, Senior Managing Director for the Tech Innovation Incubation Group at Accenture. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Max, I'd like to turn first to you. What do you think are some of the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges we face going into the geotech decade?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Stephanie and David, and all of our Geotech Commission members. It's great to be here to celebrate the launch of this report that lays out these challenges, but importantly, the opportunities ahead of us. I think the coming decade is going to be forged by an evolving confluence of technology, data, innovation, and of course, people. We have some tremendous opportunities in front of us, from strengthening the fabric of civil society to increasing the health and welfare of all people, to empowering global free markets, and to promoting constructive international dialogue and maintaining the health of our planet. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated the way that these great challenges can galvanize people to overcome them. And from that experience, new opportunities emerge. Now, nobody wants a crisis, but it's instructional as we think about the geotech decade ahead. At Amazon and at AWS, we're proud to have a leading role in innovation in combining data and technology and new ideas in the public sector. And we saw positive impacts to people in the US and around the globe as we work together like never before during this pandemic. Here's one quick example. Governments had to reach citizens in unprecedented numbers with unprecedented speed and flexibility. And one of the fastest growing trends that we saw was the digital contact centers that governments created as they tried to respond faster to citizens and to deliver the service that we've come to expect. Amazon Connect is an example of a cloud-based call and contact management center that's been used around the world. In one pilot in the United States, the government used Connect to be able to reduce the surge of calls coming in from more than 3-hour wait times to 3-minute answer times. And it's that ability to use modern digital technologies to meet the basic needs that we've got for people all around the world that provides great opportunity. Secure, scalable, cloud-based services like this have changed the way that public sector customers can serve citizens. And as far as the decade ahead, I think it's essential that we learn how to deploy and develop these critical emerging technologies. I think it's essential that we have a government and private sector partnership that emphasizes science and technology leadership. To do that, we've got to close the digital divide and build new human capital. And we also need security and the fundamentals that supports trust in this digital fabric. And lastly, we need the type of strong international cooperation between nations that I hope the Geotech report helps engender.
Thanks, Max, so much for teeing up what's really a critical inflection point and a critical frame to what this report is really about. David, I'd like to turn to you. As we can see the post-COVID world on the horizon, what role does technology and data have to play in recovering and rebuilding our economy? Where do we go from here?
I just picking up on a few of the points that Max just made. I think what COVID did in a number of different ways, is accelerate our innovation and technology journey massively. Right, our whole notion of collaborative experience, our whole notion of flexible and dynamic supply chains, of the need for rethinking the corporate firewall, and the whole notion of how do we work together, how do industries work together to be able to address critical needs in the moment, but also just our future needs. The dropping the orthodoxies that that an automaker only makes automobiles and not ventilators. Our ability to bring domains together that never really had to interact in the ways that they've had to interact as we think through global distribution of PPE or vaccine response, to be able to at a fundamental level be able to integrate what have always been separate domains: procure to pay, order to cash, logistics, trade finance, all of these different domains that at the end of the day have always been talking about the same palette of widgets or goods. But now through the use of technology, we scrambled and did amazing things to be able to get an end-to-end holistic view of data, draw better insights around it, drive better decision making at a pace we never have. And I think one of the things I'm most optimistic about is that we're going to continue to challenge those orthodoxies around how things should work or have worked, or and armed with just much more advanced and elegant ways to work with data. The journey to cloud's been massively accelerated. The component-based nature of architecture and technology, the rethinking fundamentally of what is money and what is currency and how do we do benefits distribution. The whole notion of digital identity and how do we manage our identity information. All of these things have been massively accelerated, and I think I draw some real confidence from the morning sessions and Max's comments just now that the public-private partnership around engaging on these key topics, the focus on open source, the focus on interoperability, the focus on standards to be able to drive valuable technology at speed in a way that's consistent with our social needs and policies and values is all in front of us. And so I love that this report leans in on these key topics of security and trust and transparency and enablement. I think Max is spot on. That in our post-COVID context, I hope we don't lose an ounce of the focus of recognizing that the digital divide is growing. And that if we don't use our technology capabilities and the power of the public-private partnerships to drive greater financial inclusion and digital inclusion, it's an imperative. And so I think we saw some great motions and some great outcomes over the past year, and I have every expectation that that's just going to continue to be a major focus of players both big and small, public and private.
So Max,
Stephanie,
please jump in. Yeah, please.
Do you mind? I just want to plus one what David said about the skills piece. We've been excited at the work we've done with Accenture to leverage training. We've committed, along with the World Economic Forum, to train 29 million new skilled workers to get skilled jobs by 2025. And I think a partnership across the board here is super important. So Dave, I'm glad you hit on that one.
Critically important.
Well, I want to plus one what you both have to say. And Max, I'd like to follow up and ask, in light of the digital divide, in light of the need of private and public sector partnerships, and in light of the need for government to move at speed, what strategic investments should the federal government be making to ensure that the United States retains technology leadership in the geotech decade?
Yeah, Stephanie, that's a good question. And I think it's one of the things that the report does a great job of tackling. For a little bit of scene setting, in the 60s, the federal government was spending on investments in physical capital, research, R&D, education, and training, and it represented nearly 6% of GDP. If you fast forward, that spending, that investment has decreased dramatically in the area of about 2% of GDP as of 2018. And the Geotech report recommends that the federal government increase these investments in technologies of the future. David talked about a number of them. The good news, I suppose, is that there's active discussions across government to invest in things like domestic production of leading semiconductor products, like quantum technologies. And we encourage the policymakers to consider these strategic investments in the digital infrastructure that supports US and US allies around the globe and ensures that governments and businesses can rely on trusted technology vendors. This is also in a context at a period of time when there really isn't time to wait. Other countries around the world are already making these investments, and it's imperative that we make those investments now with government investments, with private sector investments to deliver new capability, particularly in what we have termed the geotech decade. I think this is essential. What's equally essential is, and David touched on this, abandoning the old hidebound, process-driven, bureaucratic approaches that we take. I hope too that the one thing that this terrible pandemic has taught us is that those rule books are not essential. Those rule books, in fact, can slow us down. And so it's important that we keep on building, particularly replacing some of the aging infrastructure that we've got in the network space. 5G is critical. New space technologies is critical. Amazon's investing heavily in one of those areas with the Kuiper project, which is going to put up a low Earth orbit satellite high-speed broadband network that'll serve people around the world, including underserved communities. And so I guess to sum it up, I think it's absolutely critical that we make sure that we make these investments and that we do it in a way that builds that public-private partnership and that builds those foundational components for the geotech decade ahead.
Thanks so much, Max. We talked about the importance of partnerships today, David, but you can't have partnerships without trust. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the theme of trust and what role does that have to play as we think about the advancement of technology in the decade ahead?
It's central to how we're gonna succeed in the next period. We hear quite a bit and we talk quite a bit around security by design, privacy by design. I think you put those two things together, and ethics and consumer advocacy and the notion of trust by design in our systems. I think we're at a fundamentally pivotal moment where we're asking the right questions, as a society of. The models of where does our data go, who uses it, what kind of construct and permissions are surrounded, and we've got a context where we have wildly powerful technology that could be configured to the policy choices, the social choices, our consumer choices that we want to make, and to be able to get that dialogue going where we're not, just as Max referenced, we're not burdened by how it did work. We're not burdened by we don't not be burdened by the assumptions around whether a technology is good or bad, but grounded in knowing that the technology is highly configurable. What do we want? How do we want to have the foundation of the technology that supports our society? What do we want it to be? Because I'll tell you, the technology is there to match in almost every case, and so the technology sector, their ability to respond to what we all decide that we value. Is before us. And so from a trust perspective, to be able to have that transparency and clarity over use of data, over the source of machine learning algorithms and how they've been tested, over the use of biometric data, and what we're comfortable with and not comfortable with. We've got some really crucial decisions ahead of us, underpinned by wildly powerful technology that can be configured to what we want. And if we just have to get that right dialogue, open dialogue, to bring those two pieces together, such that if they're done in isolation, we're not going to get very far, and we're going to have all the frustration of we didn't realize it was going to be used in this way, or that for that purpose. So I think we've got a great opportunity. It is dependent upon that healthy public-private sector dialogue. And it's dependent on us having really clear and crisp language around the technology itself, so that we're not talking past each other, that we're using, we're very clear as to what it is a technology can do and how it works. So I think as we explore, again, the nature of how businesses and consumers relate to each other, the use of data, the use of constructs to help enable and extend privacy, I'm wildly optimistic that we've got a fantastic opportunity ahead of us to make it better.
Well, David, I hope we're really allowed to +1 those comments as well. I'm excited to hear that you both are thinking about how do we do tech and data with people as opposed to two people. How do we think about these important decisions that surround technology and how we use it and how we live our values through our tech. So thank you both for this illuminating conversation today, for all your contributions, and frankly, for your leadership on these issues. With that, I would like to welcome Fred Kemp, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Atlantic Council.
I'm Fred Kemp, and I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. And this is for the launch of the Geotech Commission report, which is one of the most important pieces of work that we'll do this year, or really any year. It's a pleasure for me that I'm able to introduce two of the honorary co-chairs from the House of Representatives. If you were tuning in earlier today, you heard the bipartisan honorary co-chairs from the Senate, Senators Mark Warner of Virginia and Senator Rob Portman of Ohio. First and foremost, I want to welcome Congresswoman Susan Delbene of Washington's 1st District, and she's actually joining us from her district. And then Congressman Michael McCall of Texas is her co-chair, from a Republican from Texas 10th District. He won't be able to join us today. Something late notice came up. His remarks will be read by Geotech Commissioner Marie Sonnenberg, who has worked for 5 U.S. presidential administrations. So that's going to be a terrific moment. First of all, Representative Delbene, and I'll introduce her briefly, but she really is one of the remarkable experts in this set of issues anywhere in Congress, the Senate, or the House. She brings a unique set of experience as a tech entrepreneur, and she was the Vice President of Marketing Store Development at drugstore.com. She was the CEO and President, and forgive me for this, Congresswoman, but my notes have failed me, so I'm trying to crib from memory here. She's been a chair of the New Democratic Coalition, one of the largest ideological coalitions in the House, and she's also, forgive me for this, but this is where everyone's talking about so beautifully about technology, but I'm on the road right now. My technology has totally failed me. But let me just say in short that there is not another person in the House, I think, who has the experience as a tech entrepreneur, as a business leader, and then coming into the House in 2012. She's provided remarkable insights into the digital economy as we developed this commission report. And we're just delighted that she could be with us today. And thank you so much, Representative Delbene, for your leadership and partnership with the Atlantic Council on this critically and important, timely effort. Following Representative Delbene, we'll hear prepared remarks from Congressman McCall, the Republican leader of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He's been committed to promoting U.S. leadership on the global stage and through particularly taking on our adversaries. Prior to Congress and his election in 2005, Congressman McCall served as the Chief of Counterterrorism and National Security in the U.S. Attorney's Office. His remarks will be read, as I said earlier, by Marie Sonnenberg. And so without further ado, Representative Delbene, it is an honor to have you. I may have missed a couple of the points in your bio, but what I didn't miss is the fact that there is nobody who knows this stuff better than anyone else, than you do in the Congress.
Thanks, Fred, and good luck with your technology issues going forward. It highlights how we
I'll
all
turn to you. I'll turn to you for advice.
we all depend on technology so much right now. We thought we did before, but even more so now. First, I want to thank the Geotech Center for inviting me to be with you today and for all of their hard work on this report. Technology really has long been one of the most impactful ways to improve and advance society. And while these improvements have been constantly evolving, this past year has highlighted just how technology can be used to help us adapt and enhance our lives. But technology does not exist in a silo. It is really foundational. It's part of the fabric of our world now. And as we've struggled with a global pandemic, we saw a rapid rise in the use of technology in our everyday lives. I think some of us thought we couldn't see a rise anymore, but I think we all did, from virtual discussions like this one, to the reliance on remote classrooms for our kids, to the surge in the use of telemedicine to keep patients in treatment from the safety of their homes. Technology really can be leveraged to improve care and our safety by also providing us with ways to connect when we couldn't be together in person. But the progressing speed, scale, and sophistication of technologies, those we're already familiar with and those we're not yet aware of, is going to continue to accelerate in the decade ahead. Governments, advocates, and the technology industry must work together to develop policies for the future to ensure that these technologies are used equitably, that they protect civil rights, human rights, civil liberties, reach all types of communities, and still promote innovation. So the report that's being released today by the Geotech Center highlights 7 key points for the next decade that will require the United States, our allies, and like-minded partners to focus on how we operate and govern, from supply chains and system resiliency to global health protection and the future of work. This report outlines detailed findings and recommendations for policymakers. And so I'm going to take a second to dig down a little more deeply in one of those and highlight a chapter I think is critically important and in many ways a starting point for all of us. And even though it is chapter 3, which was about enhanced trust and confidence in the global digital economy, updating our country's tech policies is really a priority of mine in Congress, because we're behind. Not everything is kept up with the way the world works today. And in particular, we have a lot of work to do around personal data privacy. 70% of Americans believe their data is less secure now than it was 5 years ago, and 46% feel they've lost control of their data. They're more than justified in feeling this way, as data breaches have become increasingly common, and much of technology is governed by its own rules. So as our world becomes increasingly more digital, the concern around consumer data privacy protections has been slowly brewing for years, with no significant action at the federal level here. We really need a national consumer data privacy standard that brings our laws into the 21st century, one of the recommendations of the report. And also, if we have no federal standard, we're going to see states going on their own. And we have. California signed its own consumer digital privacy legislation in 2018. Virginia recently followed suit. Washington State, where I am, and others have been trying to enact something similar. And none of this is to say that states have done anything wrong. In fact, it's understandable that state lawmakers want to protect their residents, and they've made significant contributions to the privacy discussion through this process. But a patchwork of state laws won't work in a digital world. It won't work for startups and small businesses, and it won't work for consumers who may not know what their rights are. So we need federal legislation that provides a national standard of protection no matter what state you're in. I've introduced legislation to help push us forward here, the Information Transparency and Personal Data Control Act, to set a strong national privacy standard to protect our most personal information. And there are many provisions of the bill in terms of making sure that consumers understand the privacy policies, making sure they're written clearly, and making sure that people give consent when their sensitive information is used, and making the FTC the enforcement arm of the federal government. But another piece and another recommendation for the report is around audits and making sure that we have audit so we know that there's good hygiene, privacy hygiene at companies, so that consumers do have that trust. And trust has come up a lot in this discussion already, but folks don't want to hear just when something bad happens. They want to know that we have an ongoing ecosystem to help build that trust. And when we talk about the pandemic, we've seen also an increasing need for privacy protections. The report talks about this as well. Technology has been one of our most powerful means of fighting the pandemic, and tools that have been used like contact tracing applications, telehealth and appointments, vaccine sign-up portals have definitely made it easier for people to protect themselves from the virus, and have also highlighted the critical need again for digital privacy protections. Because while HIPAA provides some protections for our health information, technology has advanced faster than our laws, and now you have a lot of health information that isn't kind of under that umbrella that HIPAA covers. So when people have entered information into a new tool, it's not always clear that that information is protected. And so that's why I helped with some of my colleagues to introduce the Public Health Emergency Privacy Act to make sure we have strong enforceable privacy standards to protect our health information from abuse. So again, something else the report's highlighting, another issue where it's so important that we as lawmakers are moving quickly. That legislation ensures that data collected for public health is strictly limited for use in public health. In addition to all of these issues being domestic issues we have to address, the issue of data privacy is also an international one. And frankly, we're behind where other countries are in creating a national privacy standard. Clearly, the significant development has been the European Union's GDPR. Europeans have not been shy about working hard to make that a global standard. And there are parts of even my proposal that would bring the US into harmony with GDPR. I think also in the United States, where we've had such strong innovation, we also have to make sure that that we have legislation that does not stifle that innovation or put the US startup community at a competitive disadvantage. So, but in the absence of a clear domestic policy, we won't be able to shape standards abroad and really have a seat at the international table, and we risk letting others drive that global policy. So privacy is a foundational issue. We have to get it right so we can build on that and address other complex issues around artificial intelligence and facial recognition. So I'm going to continue to work on this, but as the report says, governments must work to build and sustain the trust in the algorithms, infrastructure, and systems that underpin society. And so I'm hopeful that both sides of the aisle can come together to pass federal privacy legislation this Congress, but also to continue to address these issues. So thank you so much to the Geotech Commission for all of their work and for the work on this report and for engaging in this conversation. I look forward to hearing the remarks from my colleague, Representative McCall, and the panel of experts coming up as well. And I look forward to stakeholders and other policy makers being able to read this report. I think it will facilitate a robust conversation about these important issues and help advance enactment of recommendations. So again, thanks to everyone for their work, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Representative Delbene. Thank you for your leadership. That was extremely well said, and you did a wonderful painting of the full canvas of why trust and confidence in the digital economy is so paramount, and how it impacts our communities, how it impacts public health, and how it impacts small businesses and startups, and why now is a rallying cry. So thank you again for your leadership. We look forward to helping to translate this into action with you and with your stakeholders. I would now like to segue to Commissioner Marie Sonnenberg, who has been a commission member on multiple commissions and has been a leader with this commission as well. He's going to be reading remarks on behalf of Representative Michael McCall, as mentioned. And so now over to you, Commissioner Sonnenberg.
Thank you. So let's get right to it. And I have nothing but great respect. I've known him for a long time, for Mike McCall. So let's go to the reading. Dear members of the Geotech Commission, first, I would like to thank the Atlantic Council and everyone involved in putting together the Geotech Commission report. The report is an important step towards ensuring a future where technology is harassed for the good. I am proud to be an honorary congressional co-chair along with Senators Portman, Warner, and Representative Delbene on this important report, helping to ensure the way we operate, govern, will lift people and promote prosperity and peace. Since coming to the Congress, I've worked diligently to counteract threats to our cybersecurity by our adversaries. And this has become a cybersecurity that it should be one of national security policy. In addition to serving the commission, I am also proud to serve as chairman of the China Task Force. Last year, we released our China Task Force report, which included 400 recommendations to the Congress and the administration. Since the report has been released, over 1/4 of these recommendations have been acted and in law. I am confident that the Geotech Commission report is capable of the same success. I would like to also thank you for including the China Task Force report in this report. I also want to thank you, including my CHIPS for America CHIPS, a case study in this report. The purpose of my CHIPS Act is to secure a domestic supply advanced semiconductor chips. Without a secure supply of semiconductor chips, we are subject to the whims of the CCP. Without a secure supply of chips, we will be unable to build any advanced technology. And without a steady flow of chips, we run the risk of falling behind in A1, quantum computing, and other leading edge technologies. It is my sincere belief that any successful future must understand the threats posed by autocrats who want to use technology to advance their freedoms and crushing an agenda. We must work diligently to counter their efforts to weaponize supply chains, stop human rights abuses, and thwart our institution of malign influence. I am eager to see the success of this report, look forward to continuing to work with you all to develop and implement new solutions to counteract the threats facing our networks, industry, and future. Sincerely, Mike McCall, Ranking Member, House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Well, thank you, Maurice, and thank you, Representative McCall, for those very wise words. Thank you, Representative Sonnenberg. I was going to give you a promotion for sharing those remarks. We're really glad you can join us, and we'll bring you back towards the end for a benediction, but thank you for sharing those remarks from Representative Mike McCall. I'd now like to segue to our panel, where we're going to be joined by fellow commissioners. I'd like to first welcome to the stage Dean Kirshner from Carnegie Mellon University's Hine School of Public Policy. So Dean Kirshner, in the efforts around this commission report, you're very focused on the need that we need to think about an increased focus on technology policy for higher education. And so I would ask you that question: that why is there such a need for such increased focus on technology policy in higher education, and what can we do now to meet that demand? Oh, and if you can unmute yourself, sorry.
Myself. So David, thank you again for this opportunity. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on this commission and to contribute to this very timely report. So thank you to all my colleagues on the commission and to the honorary co-chairs as well. So I'd like to parse the phrase technology policy and think about it in terms of two components: technology for policy and policy for technology. So think of it in these two components. So let me explain what I mean by each of these two parts. And I'd like to give two concrete examples and then turn to this question of technology policy and higher education. So what is tech for policy? Technology, and actually our report gets into this in the context of not only the future of work chapter, but in a number of other chapters where technology is being deployed to perform tasks that people used to do. And to give a very concrete example, you could consider toll collectors. Today, there are not that many toll collectors because we much of those tasks have been automated. However, if I could give you a counterexample of the automated teller machine, which again performs a lot of tasks that tellers used to do. But if you look at the number of tellers, it's actually grown while the number of automated teller machines have increased. So it's not substituted people out. It's actually, the reason is that the type of teller job we have today is a new kind of work. They're not doing the same teller job that they used to do. They had to learn new skills. They had to learn skills of how to interact with customers of the bank and learn how to understand what their requirements were and to be able to sell products to them. So as we devise a national workforce policy, the question is one of figuring out how to sense what the market needs are as new work emerges, and then how do we identify and create upskilling and skilling programs that can rapidly provide and impart skills to our fellow citizens, and their technology has an important role to play. So at Carnegie Mellon, we have learning science and learning engineering, where you have AI-based cognitive tutors working with human teachers that can rapidly impart education and skills to individuals. So for instance, these tutors can dramatically reduce the time required to impart these skills, and these matching markets can match people with the appropriate skills to the jobs that demand them. So that's a very concrete example of technology being used in support of workforce policy. Now to the question of public policy for tech. I was going to use privacy, but Congresswoman Delbene gave a wonderful and detailed example of trust in the digital economy and her leadership and work in privacy. So let me talk about public policy in the context of AI technology. So we know AI has the potential to open up new pathways for economic opportunity, and we would like the public policy to incent AI innovation and to ensure that its deployment proceeds in an ethical and in a responsible fashion. And this will promote trust and our democratic values. And in these settings where AI is making decisions that are consequential, from social types of decisions like loan granting to autonomous systems, you have the need for guardrails. And one particular example of such a policy that's being created in the AI context is something that the Underwriters Lab has created, UL 600, which is really a convening of multiple stakeholders, policymakers, private sector, insurance companies, manufacturers, and to create a standard that potentially could be used as a guardrail. Is it perfect? No, but it's in the direction of public policy for technology. So I've given you a concrete example of technology in support of policy implementation, using workforce policy as an example. And in this case, talking about public policy for technology. Privacy is a great example, as is guardrails required for AI. Now let me turn to the question of higher education institutions and the role that they would play. I see three roles. One is as educators, and in particular, education with the need for scale orchestration through partnering and engaging multiple educational institutions. The second is on research, and the third is our role as conveners. So from the standpoint of policy implementation, where one of the things that comes to mind is this whole university network that's been built around public interest technology. So public interest technologists are really the workforce needed for policy implementation along the lines of what I just spoke about. And we at Carnegie Mellon and Heinz College have long been leaders in this, and working with the Volcker Alliance, which is a government to university partnership, as well as with the Public Interest Technology University Network that's been funded by the Ford Foundation, Hewlett, and New America. There's a large network of higher education institutions interested in and creating the workforce that can actually be policy implementers. The second, on research in public policy, Congresswoman Delbene has also led some of this work. This issue of what kinds of public policy needs to be provided to individuals, much like we have individual retirement accounts, should there be individual training accounts to allow them to, in a tax advantaged way, set money aside to invest in their own education, or for that matter, for companies to invest in their employees, much like we have the capacity to invest in other kinds of capital. What about human capital? And then importantly, in technology, to facilitate the kind of support for policy implementation. The example I gave of learning science and engineering and AI tutors comes to mind. And then finally, this issue of convening, I think what we're doing right now, working with the Atlantic Council and with policymakers to convey to them the importance of investing in science and technology and in public policy to achieve these objectives for technology policy. So, David, by parsing technology policy as policy for tech and tech for policy, I hope it sort of lends itself to a very concrete set of examples and ways in which higher education institutions can contribute.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate the encouragement, especially when you illuminated one, why we need to think about the future of work and how advances in AI and robotics and automation is going to impact us. And it may actually be an uplift for people if we're intentional about it. And that's why the commission report is so important. Also, as you talked about the importance of guardrails that we need to think about so that we can make sure, because previously with part one, we had some panelists talking about that things could go wrong, but if we're intentional about it, we can try and steer things towards good things as opposed to things going wrong. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And then on a personal note, when I was back as an undergrad and grad, Carnegie Mellon was always the cool place to go. And when I realized they had a school of public policy, I was really excited. So I would say now, if there's anything I can ever do to help with your efforts, either in Pittsburgh or with your satellite campuses, happy to help, because really appreciate everything that Carnegie Mellon is and what your school is doing to help illuminate the way forward in our challenging times. So
thank you, David.
Thank you for that. I would now like to go to Commissioner and longtime friend, Vent Cerf. Vent, really glad you've been a member of this commission. Also really glad for all the other activities you're also doing, such as the People-Centered Internet Coalition. And I would like to really sort of go with the idea that you've seen the long arc of history present itself as one of the co-creators of TCP/IP and the internet. And so would ask you, in the context of the Geotech Commission, why is how we connect to the internet so important, and how will the ability to ensure secure data and communications shape the decade ahead?
Well, I think that, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this program and for my participation in the commission. And congratulations on producing a report in jig time. Look, we've heard repeatedly from many of the participants in this discussion today that security is important, that privacy is important. And I guess I would like to suggest that we add another word here, and that's safety. Because when you think about it, the only reason anyone would be willing to trust systems that are built on top of all these information and communication technologies is that they're basically safe to use. And if they're not, that will certainly drive people away from relying on and trusting them. So the real question is, how do we construct safety out of what could be components that are not necessarily individually reliable and safe? And of course, the answer to that has a lot to do with architecture. It has a lot to do with the way in which technologies are bound together. So it seems to me that we've learned some lessons over the past, well, let's say 40 years of internet operation. And one of them is that that you don't get safety and you don't get privacy and you don't get confidentiality without making use of security technologies, including cryptography. And so strong authentication for purposes of identifying parties and identifying components of the system that you're interacting with, to say nothing of using cryptography for simply to increase confidentiality, is very important. There's a term that's becoming quite popular, certainly where I work at Google, and that's the zero trust architectures, where you make assumptions that the underlying systems are not necessarily safe and secure, and you have to build in additional layers of mechanisms for strong authentication and confidentiality. We've all learned lessons about two-factor authentication versus usernames and passwords. Once again, a technology which has some inconvenience associated with it. Our job is to drive more of that inconvenience out as much as possible to make it natural to use these methods so that accounts can't be hijacked very easily, even with the proliferation of phishing attempts that many of us are familiar with. People have briefly touched on information and misinformation and disinformation in the online environment. Again, an issue of trust. How can I trust the sources of information? What's the provenance of the information that I'm dealing with? But I want to draw a very important distinction about government systems that we rely on as citizens and that the government relies on to carry out its work, private sector enterprise systems, and our personal systems, the systems that citizens use. All three of those spheres are at risk and are in need of safety. And if we're going to achieve our objective, which is creating a technical environment in which all of those sectors are properly protected, they will have to cooperate and collaborate with each other. The recent administration executive order highlights the importance of cooperation and collaboration between the government and the private sector, sharing of information in order to alert to risk and to cooperate in order to defend. All of those things are going to be needed if we are going to depend increasingly on these technologies. And I think everyone in this discussion would agree that our dependence on information and communication technology has grown dramatically, possibly very dramatically during the period of the pandemic. The question is, how safe are we depending on all of those various components? And in particular, how do we bring the general public into a sphere of safety, given that we don't have the same incentives to offer them as the government has for its employees and how the private sector creates incentives for cooperation in the use of these various technologies? How do we provide that incentive for the general public? And that is, I think, one of the challenges of the coming decade, is to achieve balance across all three of those spheres.
Well said, Vin, and I really appreciate your remarks, and in particular about thinking about how we need to address the challenges of security, address the challenges of making sure that we have the pedigree of information where it comes from, and we have a surety there. And if I could ask you just one quick rejoinder, given that here we are holding the launch event, and we've braved and navigated the entire last year through the internet. When you were making TCP/IP and you were thinking about how it might be used in the future, and then the internet and everything that happened after that, did you ever see that it would actually be the lifeline that would actually hold us together in the midst of this pandemic? Did you ever possibly imagine that?
Well, the obvious answer is, of course we knew that. The whole thing is unfolding exactly the way we planned it. If you'd like to know, let's see, it's 10 minutes to 6. In about 7.5 minutes.
Yes.
So of course, but the answer is also not no. It's not no, because we had 4 years of experience with the ARPANET, the predecessor to the internet, and we could see the seeds of much of what we see today there, but certainly not at the same scale. And I have to admit to being very surprised to see a system like this grow by a factor of 10 million over the course of the last 35 or so years. Not very many architectures have had that capability. And so I'm frankly astonished, and I should say, I'm pleased certainly that this seems to be working well, but we have so much work to do to make this an environment that we want to and can rely upon.
Well said, and I look forward to the next journey ahead. I mean, we're approaching, I think, if we haven't already reached 4 billion people using it, and I look forward to bringing on another 3 billion and more. So kudos, and thank you, Vin, and thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you for that, David. Just to point out something, it's not just the people. because now we have devices that are programmable and are part of the internet. Those will number in the many, many billions, and they will too be potential avenues for either harm or at least risk. And so figuring out how to cope with that degree of scaling is also on our agenda.
Very, very true, and near and dear to my heart as one who actually has weathered a storm of bots in the past. I agree that we need to think about how we move forward together. So I appreciate, Vin, all your leadership and how we move forward, and I look forward to the next few months as we both socialize and scale and translate these reports, recommendations, actions. And as you said, it is also humans, but it's also devices, it's bots, it's algorithms, it is everything that surrounds us, and that is really the interesting geotech future ahead. I'm going to now segue back to fellow colleague, Deputy Director of the Geotech Center, Stephanie Wander, who has been leading efforts on women in tech. And I'm going to actually ask you a question on that area, but also give a little bit of background. That Stephanie joined us in November. That was midway through the commission. She comes from a great background that includes several activities at XPRIZE, including leading the formation of the AI XPRIZE that was there, also work on flying cars, but then also time at USC and connecting entrepreneurships with social work and connecting the two. And what I really want to ask you to give some thoughts on, Stephanie, is the importance of recognizing women in tech. If you could share what that is and what it embodies and what we're trying to do with the Geotech Center there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I think that one of the things we heard today about is really about the digital divide and what that means for all of us. And I think that this past year has really demonstrated to us what that means in real terms with our all of those in our communities. And truly the path out of that digital divide for us isn't just about access to technology in terms of what computers you get to use every day or what technology you use to get every day. It's everything from your pipeline of living through your education, through your access to work. That's why I think some of the future of work initiatives that we heard today are so commendable, because ultimately we have to ensure that everyone is actually participating in the economy, in the wealth that's generated through the high growth that we're going to see in the technology space. And so for us, that's why I think standing up a women in tech pillar and frankly, a diversity in tech pillar was just so absolutely essential. We've got to be looking at all angles of how we're bringing everyone along. And I think one of the other themes from today and from the discussion earlier that David Treat pointed out is that these are not conversations just about tech or tech access. They're conversations about what do we value, who's participating in the conversations, and how do we ultimately all come together to make better decisions? And we will all make better decisions together if everyone is well represented. I think we'll have more creativity, better solutions. And we know, given the global challenges we're facing, that it's absolutely essential that we have new and fresh ideas at the table. So I couldn't be more proud of our interest in work in this area and really the importance of standing up issues and advocating for diversity in new ways. And I believe some of the stewardship that we're seeing today is really a sign of a new direction. So thank you.
Well said, and thank you, Stephanie. And I look forward to when we can possibly either embrace a partner to do a challenge in this space, something that's XPRIZE-like, or do some sort of design-related competition or some project initiative, because the world we're going into, the way we will learn is by learn by doing. And as we often say at the Geotech Center, the other thing is the best way to predict the future is to create it. So I look forward to working with you on that, Stephanie. And now for a benediction, I'm going to segue back to Commissioner Marie Sonnenberg, again, having advised at least 5 different presidential administrations, also served previously as co-chair for the National Commission on the Review of the Research and Development Programs of the U.S. Intelligence Community when I met you way back when in 2012. Here we are about 9 years, almost 10 years later since that commission, Maurice, and I would ask you, having been on multiple congressional and presidential commissions before, why is the Geotech Commission and its recommendations so important now?
One addition to what you did in my introduction, your introduction and $1.65 gets me on the Fifth Avenue bus.
And then that's not counting for inflation 5 years from now.
Well, the importance, and by the way, let me go back. Both Senators Warner and, pardon me, the 2 senators and our congressman, they touched on one very important subject, China. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So my view is there's a foreign policy aspect to this, maybe involving the State Department and around there. And that foreign policy is the supply chain, China, as our members of Congress have pointed out. And it's at that point where we're going to have to be much more activated in terms of whether it's the Defense Appropriations Act and the money that flows from those, all of those items become essential if we're going to protect the technology we have and shelter it from unseen enemies or maybe known enemies. So I would like to see a great deal more attention paid by the State Department. Not that the State Department per se is that good at it, but there are little divisions in there. I mean, it becomes important to have a general understanding on where we are, which is why those members of Congress went to China, but it becomes even more Russia and private people who are hired by some of these countries. And so somewhere along the way, we're going to have to recognize, no matter what we're talking about in our domestic activities here, protection, civil liberties, all of that, it's not going to matter much if our supply chains, etc., are hampered by not, I don't mean Mars. I mean,
as far as we know yet.
Well, could be, yes, right. Alien actors who are not looking out for our interest, but would like to live off our leadership, by the way, which we had. I mean, it's not the 50s. In the late 50s, we developed satellites. We put up one of the first ones in 59. Thereafter, we had another situation. Early on in the 60s, we went to the moon. We were alone. We were on top of the world. We're not on the top of the world anymore. And so I would urge us to look more at the foreign policy aspect of this activity.
Well said, Maurice, and I like how you sort of brought it all together for us, and that, the Commission leads with the importance of global and S&T leadership, and that's not just leadership in the United States, but working with our allies in Europe, working with our allies in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and reaching out to other democratic partners such as India and elsewhere around the world. And then building on top of that, we heard from Vint about the importance of secure data and communications. We heard from Dean Kirshnan about the importance of trust and confidence in the digital economy. You stressed, Maurice, the importance of supply chains. There's also global health. And then you concluded and brought it back to space, where it used to be in the 50s and 60s, space was an activity that was done by the US government. And now, while obviously NASA is still leading the way, especially in things that are beyond the immediate orbit of our planet, we need to also think about how we can engage US companies engaged in space exploration as well, and do so in a global way. So I really appreciate your leadership. And I see you have another thought, so I'll let you chime in with additional thoughts.
No, well, you said US companies. I'd also engage some of our foreign allies much more.
Well said.
Where we can secure the information, but having.
I agree. And I think that's where I look forward to the months ahead with what we can do, like you said, to reach both in terms of sharing geotech insights and recommendations to report with the State Department, but also reaching out to our allies, both in terms of their government apparatuses, and even possibly more important, engaging entrepreneurs around the world that care about these issues as well, because entrepreneurs around the world in some respects will have a bigger immediate impact in shaping the decade ahead. So again, I thank you for your leadership, Maurice, and thank you for everything that you do. Thanks again to our commissioners as well, Dean Kirshnan, to Vint Cerf, Commissioner Vint Cerf. Thank you to our co-chairs to the commission, as well as Representative Delbene and Representative McCall, and the previous remarks that were shared earlier today from Senator Mark Warner and Senator Rob Portman. For everyone out there, stay tuned. The 14 months that it took to launch the public recommendations is just the first step of the journey. We are now in orbit. And now we actually embark on the larger task of socializing, scaling, and translating these recommendations to action. And to that end, I will say, as we always like to say here at the Geotech Center, please be bold, please be brave, and please be benevolent for the future ahead. I'll see you next time.